Thank you very much, Priya, and thank you to the India Art Fair Talks program for giving us this opportunity for a conversation between friends, colleagues. These are three individuals whose work I deeply respect and admire and am transformed by over decades, years, months. And I think that it's very interesting that we're focusing on the question of change and transformation because, I mean, if we're not going to be changed by art, why be here, right? I mean, the whole point, I think, of being in the presence of art or literature or culture or music is an opportunity to find something about ourselves that we can continually be surprised by. And that surprise, which is a process of discovery of ourselves and the world, is the reason that my colleagues in Raqs Media Collective and I are artists in the first place, or became artists, and why we find ourselves in the presence of art. I wanted to start with a little quote from a writer that I deeply admire, and that's Octavia Butler. She's a science fiction and fantasy writer based in the United States, speaking often to and from an African-American experience, going back several centuries in terms of thinking about what the transformations of being have made possible in history. And also she thinks about the future and parallel worlds. And there's a beautiful book by her called The Parable of the Sower, and it's the first book in a series called the Earth Seed series. And she says, all that you touch, you change. All that changes, changes you. All that you change, changes you. The only lasting truth is change. And this is a very old idea. It goes right back to Parmenides. It goes right back to the Charvaka people here who are constantly thinking about flux and change. But I also like the idea of the intersection between change and touch, because I think that one of the things that we have to recognize is that art touches us. In a way, it touches our epidermis, so that you know when you're in the presence of a great work of art, whether it's song or a painting or a picture or an installation, something happens to your skin. You get goosebumps sometimes. You get fluttering sensations in your stomach. Your eyes get startled. So there's a somatic, touching experience of what changes in the presence of great art, right? And I think that the three people who are my co-panelists are all embodiments of custodianship of change, because change is a process that requires care, and it requires careful handling because things can go wrong. Art is not an innocent practice. Art can damage people. It can damage artists, it can damage communities, it can damage the people who work with it. But if we are to think of art as nurturing, as caring for ourselves and each other, then we have to build institutional mechanisms that foster and keep the presence of custodianship. And I think in all three instances, in the transformations that have been wrought by the three of you, change is a particular processual consideration. I want to start by asking Mónica Bello, whom I've met in the bowels of the Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland, looking and thinking about elementary particles, thinking about matter and spending time with her in the antimatter factory. It's an idea that has concerned us in the Raqs Media Collective for some time now. I thank Mónica for that introduction to antimatter in physical form. But I want to talk to her first about this conjunction between art and science that seemingly appear to be completely different universes. And it's interesting that you're talking about it, but we also have Bonaventure, who's a living embodiment of, he's been a biotechnologist, he's worked in particle physics, and he's now a leading transformer of the world of the arts. Pooja Sood is somebody who's worked very heavily invested in the intersections between art and science. This is something that actually all three of you are doing. But I want to talk to you about what happens when these unexpected encounters between artists, scientists, and the environment of curiosity, which you foster so beautifully at CERN. So maybe we can start with you.
ready. Well, thank you. You start with one of my favorite writers for two reasons, because it allowed me, Octavia Butler, sent me to the world to travel and through the mysteries of our mind, and also because Octavia Butler is not very seduced by language, so she's super practical. So you can love a quote of Octavia Butler by the actual significance of it rather than the aesthetic impact. And yeah, so I'm super fan. Thank you. Great way to start. And the second one is the last time I was in the Large Hadron Collider was with you and Mónica and all the Raqs Media Collective, and was just me observing you, observing the machine that tell us that there are interactions that happen in subatomic matter, and this takes us back to a universe that is not the universe in which we are living today. Nothing is the same. Everything has changed, and I'm not going to tell you why, but it's been, trillions of years or much more, and we are here by accident. But I'm not here to talk about particle physics. I'm a curator that allows artists to do things at the laboratory. So it's not that I come with a topic and I say, hey, explore this, because they come with proposals that are very diverse and surprising. So what I'm going to start maybe is to try to be brief and to come with a question. I've been thinking of what is the role of art today, but what is the role of imagination? How as an idea starts in our mind, how the idea sparks, and what is this process? I think John Berger talked a lot about how this idea comes to our mind, but and he is super inspiring, and I always go and run and find a book of him. But instead of talking about John Berger, I'm going to show you the proposals of two artists who came to CERN with this idea. How can we imagine things that are coming from a deep intuition, and that by connecting with other disciplines and other fields, places and contexts that are really beyond our reach, our cognition, the way we understand our world, they can transform and become and even confirm our own ideas. So the picture that you are seeing behind me is part of the holographic universe theory of art history by Susan Dreister. Susan Dreister is an artist from London. He spent a couple of months with us as an artist in residency at CERN in Geneva. And she keeps coming, and I'm keeping asking her to come, because what she gets to be done at the laboratory is quite extraordinary. When Susan Dreister came to the laboratory, she came with a question, and I would even say with a hypothesis. And she investigated for many years this principle called the holographic principle, and which is a theory that says that our universe could be understood as a vast and complex hologram. And this theory that she has hypothesizes that beyond acknowledged art, historical context, and imperatives, artists might have also been unconsciously attempting to describe the holographic nature of our universe. So when she came to CERN, she posed this question, this plain question, to scientists and said, what do you think? Am I right or wrong? And well, so they spent time together, but instead of explaining and talking and using language to go in through the conundrums of this question and the complexities of the theory, she asked them to bring images. And there is nothing more difficult for a particle physicist than to put their theories on an image that is not mathematical. So this ended up being 20 different images, as the one you see here. But then she also, that were made by the scientists, were using the same watercolor techniques that Susan uses. But then later, she represented this hypothesis, projecting over 25,000 chronological images of art history, from cave painting to global contemporary art, including outsider and art brut expressions, and into this projection, echoing conceptually the actions of the Large Hadron Collider, which is accelerating particles at a higher rate. And this colossal library of images is together with a soundtrack in which her and the scientists are trying to understand the holographic principle of the universe from art and science perspective. So the second artist I want to talk about is Patricia Dominguez from Chile. Patricia came from a very different approach, but very complementary to what Susan Trister does. And in fact, it's a very rewarding feeling that I have, because now they are working together in a new project. Patricia moved to outside Santiago de Chile, 2 hours in the north, to be close to nature and close to a horse that came to live with her. And she has this, what it seems, an idyllic life of an artist in a little house on her own. However, she paints these beautiful images, but she has a deep preoccupation of what we are doing with this world and what is the role of the artist. So when Patricia builds these imaginations through the images that you are seeing here today, this is this painting is called Si tocan a una, nos tocan a todas. If they touch one of us, they touch us all. She tells that we are connected by bloodline, all of us. And with among humans, among the species, cultures, religions, faiths, but also through different ways of understanding nature, cosmologies, cosmogonies, from the Atacama Desert to Delhi, in the core of Delhi, and everywhere else. So these two artists, I want to just wrap up, are looking for change. They are looking for change in our understanding, in this mental framework in which we live, this mindset that we have. And they are inviting us to do that without giving just a straight message. Yeah, they are just dreaming about new imaginations. And I'll leave it here.
Thank you, Monica. I think that what you pointed out was this incredible connection between the observation of change and transformation in the universe, in the world outside us, which science does. When it does it so beautifully. But how that then impacts on how we understand ourselves, the internal change, the question of what the imagination does to our understanding of ourselves, which is, I think, very much the province of art. So if we think of the universe as being centered around the Earth, this one little wet planet, and centered around this species, the human beings, our understanding of ourselves is different. But we think of ourselves as a speck floating in the foam from the Big Bang. I recently discovered after I went to CERN that when you turn on the black and white TVs that we used to have as like I used to have as children, that snow that you see is leftover radiation from the Big Bang. It's cosmic background radiation. Understanding that changed everything I know about myself, right? That when I was turning on the TV, I was sort of tuning in to the beginning of the universe. And I think that's the question that I want to lead with when I come to Pooja. Because in an interview some years ago, you had said, KHOJ is concerned, and KHOJ is this amazing space in Delhi, in Khirki village. Those of you who don't know it, please get there. It's the center of the universe, even though the Earth is not the center of the universe. KHOJ means search, means quest, means asking questions. And you said the basic question is, what can art be and what can art do? right? I mean, I think there is no more fundamental question than that. And I think that your more than several decades long engagement with this city, with our community as artists, is constantly reminding ourselves to ask, what can art be? What can art do? How do you do it?
Thank you, Shuddha, for that, and thank you very much, Monica, for an amazing beginning. You've spoken about imagination. I think I'm going to speak about how we do it in the way we do. So yes, you picked up on what even our website says, but I think talking about imagination, it's really about us trying to figure, since we started, as to what can art do and what can art be in terms of the intersections at which we work, which has also been around art and science, and art and gaming, and various other things. But what is it that it can be, that can broaden our very limited understanding sometimes of art practice or contemporary art practice? But what can it do became even more, I think, important, even more urgent in the last couple of years, where we had to sit back and say, okay, what is it that KHOJ, located where we are, what is it, what are the questions that we're asking, and how do we do it with the artists we work with? Because we are, I would like to say, a lab, a very small lab, which has just a bunch of rooms, but it's really the imagination of the artists that fill it and the work that they do. This is where we're located. This is Khirki village, which is an urban village in Delhi, in this sprawling, fantastic space that you've seen the more elegant parts of. And this is what our KHOJ used to look like, and this is what our building is. Just to say that when we came in 2002, it was we who were the new entrants into this village. You know, because it was a mixed neighborhood, largely populated by men, migrant labor that came from various different parts of India to work there. And we were trying to just build trust. And this is a work, so we just went out with young artists and said, let's try and get to know our neighborhood. And this is a work actually done by an artist who you will speak and talk about, Rohini, with another friend, where this was a shop maker, a tiny little barber's shop, where they worked with scissors and kind of made a AIDS rainbow, but which the barber then began to own and say very proudly, oh, you know, these scissors my great-grandfathers used to have, which was not true because they'd bought them all in Old Delhi. So yeah, but coming from those kind of projects, more recently, about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, we had a huge influx of artists and refugees as well as migrants from Africa that came into Khirki village. And there was a very terrible incident, which some of you may know, which hit the headlines, where one of our MLAs accosted 2 Ugandan women and accused them of flesh trading, and it hit the headlines. It was terrible. And we knew for a fact, because we'd seen all the Africans in the area, that they were being, Indians are very racist, so they were really being slurred. There were people, you know, but really treating them badly. And we didn't know what to do about it. We didn't know how to deal with it. And so there was one artist who came in, and I'm just going to tell you a few stories, who set up a little phone recharge shop in the street, in this very busy, male-dominated, narrow street. And she said, for 10 rupees, you can come and recharge she'd come 3 times a week and stand there. And every time she recharged their phone, she'd put some African music onto the Indian Bhojpuri, Bihari migrant laborers, and every time the migrant laborers, the Biharis came, she'd put African and the other way, Bhojpuri music onto the Africans, and they'd be listening to this saying, what is this? And this slowly morphed into a little room where people were able to talk to each other. And so over a period of, I think, a year, we were able to have little talk shows with a Nepalese woman, an African, I think it's there, a Nepalese woman, an African young man, people who would never talk to each other, people who actually disliked each other, because there were rumors that, you know, of course, you know, Africans are terrible and they're too strong and they can do things to us. And these were the ways that we were able to really talk about it. That also made us realize that what happens on the street by working with them is something that we need to bring into the studio. It's not something bereft, it's not something separate. And so for several years we did residencies looking at our relationship with the African continent, countries in Africa, and that led to some very, very important projects for us. We also came up with a lovely, one of the projects was something called Khirki Voice, which is a newspaper done in Hindi and in English, which we bring out every 3 months, but it also talks and gives voice to all the migrants and all the people, including local people in Khirki. There was a Somalian refugee lady, and we worked for over a year with long conversations with a designer and a curator, and came up with a graphic novel which talked about what it means to be a refugee. They don't want to leave the country, but what does it mean? And so on and so forth. But just coming to several of the other things that have brought us to the kind of work we do. Since I think 2004, we've been looking at the line of inquiry has been around climate change. And some of the projects that we've done, but I'm going to skip this because I'm running out of time, is really looking at what constitutes, what is air pollution in Delhi. It sounds like such a banal question to ask. But we came to it because of several reasons. One, because we were all breathing difficult. I think today the AQI is 341 or 400. And we wanted artists to think about this and really think about it during COVID, where it became better and we realized what it was all about. And we then worked with an artist called Zulekha Chaudhary. We did several projects, but the one that I want to bring here, this was an air expo that we did. We had an exhibition which talked about the Haus. But this is the one I want to talk about, which was done in collaboration with theatre artist Zulekha Chaudhary, who's really been questioning the performativity of law and what it means. This was done at a time when there was a huge farmers, one of the largest farmers' agitation being held at the outskirts of Delhi. And of course, it was about something else. But when the pollution becomes really bad in Delhi, the blame is laid squarely at the farmers, saying, oh, all the stubble burning is happening in Chandigarh, in Punjab and Haryana. And we thought we'd take that as a starting point to question why that was happening, and went backwards in time. We went and met several of the farmers' unions, talked to them, and then we had a staged hearing, which was done under the rubric of the National Green Tribunal, which is the government organization that is supposed to take on environmental concerns. This was done in Chandigarh because that is the capital of Punjab. It was trilingual. We had 3 retired judges, 3 lawyers, a real petition, and 3 artists who come from farming backgrounds, who spoke about not just air pollution, but really a plea for rights of nature to be brought into our constitution, into Article 15, which is the right to life, which today actually means life for human beings, but really to bring in right to life of the non-human. And it was this kind of in-between space of being a staged hearing, but with real people playing their real roles as artists, as lawyers, as witnesses. And these are the kind of interventions that we believe get artists to play themselves, but talk about what matters to them and how they showcase their work, but also for us as an arts organization to try and really do the research and unpack what it means for an arts organization to do the work that we do. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Pooja. I'm just going to say that a couple of days ago, day before yesterday, I was at an opening at KHOJ, this brilliant exhibition, 28 Degrees North, which is a set of weather reports for our time. We have a work there, and I was standing in the middle of our installation, and I overheard a young Afghan woman telling her young Indian friend about the relationship between rivers in India and Nigeria. And I think, which is something to do with the work that we did. But what I'm trying to say is that I think that the conversations that you've fostered at KHOJ, consciously, with purpose, but also epiphenomenologically, they happened, right? Constitute a model of how we can imagine the world and being a citizen of the world. And that has changed this city, certainly, right? Where a young Afghan woman, a refugee with a very precarious hold on life, belonging to a neighboring institution in sort of shadowy presence called the Samurg Center, which is a wonderful place for the Afghan community, interning with you, actually talks about, to her friend, about rivers in Africa. And this, for me, is the power of what an art space can do and how it changes the world. Which brings me to Bonaventure. The amazing thing that I've witnessed, both in your leadership at Savvy, as well as what is the program at the House of World Cultures, is that you've taken the role of the witness from the global south as being someone who doesn't just report the lament and litany of the world, but actually foregrounds a certain playfulness and a philosophical depth, saying this is the world. This is not about what happens elsewhere. We're not reporters of what happens elsewhere, but this is what the world is. And I recall reading an interview that I was very struck by at times of, during the time of COVID, where you talked about the responsibility of care at a time of precariousness, where people are afraid even to touch each other or be in the same space. And yet, in Savvy, I have been witness to the incredible gatherings that you fostered and the sense of fellowship and solidarity and association that you fostered House of World Culture. In that sense, you again are changing Berlin, making it responsive to the world in ways that it has never been before, and also producing encounters and conversations that are unprecedented in the arts, but also, I would say, in terms of a greater thinking about what being in the world means today.
You do marvelous introductions. It's unbelievable. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be with you all here. I've been very inspired by your work, and I feel blessed to share this stage with you all. So thank you for that. And before I get to saying something proper, I wanted to acknowledge the presence of a few friends here and thank the art fair for getting us here, and thank the Goethe-Institut for facilitating that too, and the presence of Trishla, Mayuri, Prabhakar, Sumesh, and the great Cameroonian artist Bartholomew Togo, who's in the space with us. I just wanted to acknowledge that, so thank you all for coming. My entry point to the issue of change is change as a transformation, as a transformative process. And since we spoke about sciences, I wanted to talk about one of the laws of thermodynamics that say that energy can never be destroyed. It can only be transformed from one stage to the other. And that is something that has been at the core of a lot of the work many of us do here, but especially what we've been trying to do. Different institutions have been involved in, this idea of transforming something or being in a time and space of transformation and how one reacts to that. And I like the notion of friction, in which that energy is transformed, because whenever there's friction, there is a transformation from, mechanical to, say, thermal energy or some form of energy. And friction, be it in the moment of crisis like COVID or socio-political crisis of any kind, really, you know, to the question of what can art be and what can it do, how can it actually function in these spaces of friction, you know, something that has really intrigued me in the past years. And to answer your provocation, I'd like to walk you through, I don't have any images, but I'll walk you through 3 examples of projects that we've done in the past years. One would be Savvy Contemporary in Berlin that came up at a time when Germany was really questioning itself whether it is a migrant society or not, whether it should follow a certain notion of what they call light culture, you know, a very monochromatic, monocultural notion of culture, and we being in there, exactly as you said, Shuddha, reminding them that no, this place has never been an island. It is part of the world. It is in touch, as you said, you know, the relationship between change and touch. It's always been in touch with the rest of the world. And it's so omnipresent, but people don't want to see it. And our duty was just to point that out to them, you know, and helping them dig deep, you know, finding a notion of profundity through the artworks, through the artists we brought to Berlin, or that were already in Berlin, and we wanted to show these relations. One obvious relation would be, obviously, the fact that the African continent was partitioned in that very space called Berlin in 1884. You know, on the 15th of November, 1884, the so-called 14 great nations sat on that table and decided to, you know, to cut into pieces the whole continent. And the question was, how would you build a nation after that and forget such an important historical moment? So we're not willing to accept that. In the beginning of the 20th century, there was a journal, a Cameroonian journal in Germany called Elolombeya Cameroon, the Sun of Cameroon, published a bilingual journal, published in German and in Douala. So you had Cameroonians in the beginning of the 20th century doing intellectual work in that space. We're not willing to accept that this was a monocultural, monochromatic space. So the work we're doing there was to invite artists from different parts of the world to come together and tell this plethora of stories and actually show how we relate to each other. That was 15 years ago, and we've continued doing that. The second example I wanted to give was acting in a moment of transformation in Mali, 2019 and 2022. You know, there was a coup d'etat in Mali, a military government came to power, and the question was, how do you do an art exhibition in such a moment of precarity? You know, I remember the first edition of the biennial I did in 2019 was speaking to the president, Ibeka, Ibrahim Boubacar Keita, you know, may so rest in peace. And there were challenges, financial challenges, and I asked him, but don't you see that this is a moment of transformation? I think this is a moment in which we have to invest in culture. And he said, he replied to me, how do you invest in culture when there's a war going on in the north of the country? And my response to him was, actually, there is a war going on in the north of the country because we do not know each other. And that is actually where culture plays a very important role. So in such moments of friction, we actually need to invest even more in culture, right? So it was about bringing artists from the African world, you know, be it from the Martinique, from Brazil, from India, from Cameroon, South Africa, all these places to come together, you know, in that space and do a cultural project, which was quite transformative for the individuals coming there, meeting each other, talking to each other, being with each other, but also showing that there is another way is possible, right? So that was the second example I wanted to point out. The third example, I mean, I could talk about the House of World Cultures, but I think we can talk about that when there's a Q&A. But another example is something we just started a few months ago in Cameroon called the Savi Kwata. Kwata is the pidgin word for quartier, for district, for barrio. So what we've been trying to do at Savi is to create, you know, different Savi quarters around the world. You know, so people, because Savi has people from 14 different nations around the world, so people just take up that responsibility and do one in Colombia, do one in Brazil, and we started one in Limbe in Cameroon. And this was particularly important because Cameroon has been at war, you know, in a state of war in the past 7, almost 8 years now, especially in the English-speaking part of the country, the Anglophone part of the country. And kids have not been able to go to school for 8 years. There's been an incredible, you know, mass exodus from that English-speaking part of the country to the French-speaking part of the country or to Nigeria. So, but the question was, what do we do in such times? And a lot of us, you know, haven't been able to go back to Bamenda, where I come from, in the past 8 years. But what do we do? So we created a space, a Savi Quarter that took the form of a library. The fastest growing business in Cameroon is the business of the bar. You know, in every street you can find 10 clubs and bars. And so we said, but what if we use the model, but to do it in libraries? So we've started with this one. We've collected 6,000 books. And unfortunately, one of the kids that helped us collecting the books was shot in the summer of last year, and you know, he passed. But we continue doing the work. That is the work of transformation, you know, from the base. And at this space, at this Savi Quarter, what we want to try to do is, you know, epistemic transformation, learning to do work based on the culture, the immediate culture. So learning how to weave, you know, and people have forgotten about these things because the post-colonial regime says we all have to become clerks or medical doctors or engineers. And we forget the basic things: weaving, braiding. How do you braid? Why is it that only women should know how to braid? Maybe men are also interested in that, or should also know that, you know. Why is a xylophone in this particular way? Why do the different sticks of a xylophone make different sounds, you know? And we brought in people that actually carry such knowledges with them, you know. Not professors in some fancy universities from some fancy places, but the people around there that carry the knowledges. And we worked with one guy who's been collecting stones, you know. So this space is in Limbe. Limbe is at the Atlantic, you know, the Atlantic coast, not far away from the Mount Cameroon, that is an active volcano, incredibly beautiful city, you know, with black sand. And this guy goes on a walk every morning and he collects stones. But why does he do that? He sells the stones to people. And we invited him because he carries this knowledge. And he said, when we use the stones, people buy the stones to wash themselves, to scrub their feet. And he says, we no longer do that because we can buy some products that were brought from somewhere in the world and use it. But the minerals, the stones carry minerals, and when you use that, you take up those minerals. He spoke about the stones we used to grind, back in the days, every home had 2 stones that you used to grind pepper or ginger, and now we use blenders. And he said, when you use those stones to grind the pepper, the minerals from the stones get into the food, and you take that up as well. So we're trying to think of these knowledges and how do we keep them. So that to me is the way I relate to transformation, to change, but a change that is not really far-fetched, but it's very close, an immediate change, the knowledges we embody and we carry with us. And of course I can talk about, my being in Berlin and doing the work there, but I'm also interested in having my foot, at least one, in different places in the world. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonaventure. Listening to you, I was reminded of the great 18th century Enlightenment philosopher who is not often cited, a man from West Africa called Anton Wilhelm Amo, who 50 years before Immanuel Kant, wrote this treatise on sobriety and accuracy in the philosophical sciences, a beautiful treatise in which he proposed the possibility that the faculty of reasoning and philosophizing is not specific to any culture. Around the same time, in 18th century Patna, which is a city in Bihar, not where you would expect it to be, there was a compendium of comparative theology and philosophy called the Dabistan-e-Mazahib, the School of Manners. And these were propositions about a transcendental panversal, not a universal, not one universe, but a panversal, transcendental idea of what it means to constitute the world, the imagination, and the citizen. So I'm reminded of the fact that whether it's an artist's imagination of the holographic universe, whether it's the condition of how we reconfigure bodily knowledge to transcend into the world, like you suggested, or what it means for a street in an urban village in Delhi to reclaim its centrality in the world. These are all processes by which the visionary work of aesthesis, sensation, and the imagination reconstitute ourselves and the world. Before I open the floor to question, I have one brief question to all of you. You can respond in one word, one sentence, or not at all if you choose to. We talked about how art changes things. I want to ask each of you, how has art changed you?
So I'll go first. I don't think I'd be the person I am, because I think art has provided a worldview which I would never have got if I'd continued to doing mathematics, which is what I studied, or maybe it would have. But I think it has really provided a worldview, meeting a world of ideas that are so diverse and so beautiful, including the ones that we've just had here. So it has changed me and made me the person I am.
It's an open question that I have. I don't know if I have changed. I have doubts often, but if I have to summarize what art gives me and why I keep pursuing my life to art, connected in the art with artists, is that it gives me hope, and it's funny and it's really entertaining, and gives me leisure as well, gives me irony, and gives me all these questions that allows me to balance what is, I think you mentioned before this word, that maybe I mishear you, but I think a lot about sobriety and grandiosity. So for me, art is sobriety. It's just keeping the focus in what you really want to do, and there is a signification in the process, and that can be shared with others. So all of that gives me hope and meaning.
First of all, thank you for mentioning Anton Wilhelm Amo. Incredible. We did a show on Anton Wilhelm Amo's work, the Faculty of Sensing, and spent some time researching his work that was difficult to find, but it was very important to do that. Yeah, art challenges us. What has art done to me, to us? It has challenged us massively. It has questioned the ground on which we stand. Art has the capacity to question gravity. The certainty in which, we find ourselves, the assumptions, this whole assumptions of these concepts like democracy, like freedom of speech, like, all these things that we utter on a daily basis. Art gives us the possibility of questioning them. So that is what art has done to me. We did a project, looking at Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. And the only way we could really do that was through the art and inviting artists to help us understand the work, 50 years down the line. And that has been transformative, doing it at the Banjul Station, Bartholomew Togo space in Cameroon, that is a space that looks at culture and agriculture. Doing it in Kenya, in Trinidad and Tobago, and other places, has helped, really question these notions of development and underdevelopment and so on and so forth. So if I have to say what art has done to me, to us, it's really been to question those bases, those foundations.
Thank you so much. Wonderful responses. I'm going to open the floor to questions, comments, thoughts from all of you. Mindful of time, keep them brief so that we can all have a conversation. Sabi Ahmed, right at the back. Yep.
Thank you all. Amazing panel. I'll keep it brief. I wanted to shift the weight from change and transformation to the question of agency. And this is to anyone who would like to answer on the panel. There's obviously a lot of discussion around silencing and whatnot around art and artists. What do you think, and what would you have to say about the agency of the artist in the present moment, especially in times when I think a lot of things are being upturned: institutionality, regimes, what can be said, what is unsayable, all of those things. So yeah, the question is, what do you feel is, or what do you think about the agency of the artist today?
Can we take a few more questions so that we can bunch them together? Agency of the artist, what do we think about that? Yes. Anyone else? Yes, gentleman over there.
Thank you all for a really engaging and enriching panel and discussion. I just have a question in particular, because particularly Bonaventure, when you're speaking about the role of art in war in times of conflict and crisis, or the role of art in times of conflict and war, it made me think about 100 years ago, the Russian artist Nicholas Roerich sort of tried to develop a pact of nations all over the world to try and preserve arts and culture even in times in war of conflict. And so about 100 years or so later, I'm just curious how you see the reverberations of that kind of international coalition of trying to not just preserve but push forward the role of culture in times of conflict and war.
Thank you. Great question. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Mine is not a question, but a response. I just wanted to congratulate you for this excellent panel that we had, and great moderation, sir. And one common thread that I saw in all three panelists was how you're in touch with reality, how you are transforming communities around you. And that's what's my takeaway from today. And in that spirit, I wanted to also respond to the question that you asked of what art does to you. So for me, it transforms. Art transforms. And just like we see that, I won't even say that it changes things. Like when we talk about behavior change, I work in the area of behavior change. I run an organization called Voice, and we work for arts for public health and social change. So the world is talking about behavior change communication. But the reason that, I feel we can work with arts is because then you're no longer the caterpillar, you change into a butterfly, and you never go back to being a caterpillar, you become the butterfly. So that's what the power of arts, that's what it does. So thank you for throwing more light in that area, and I really enjoyed listening to all of you. Thanks.
So the agency of butterflies and caterpillars, art in times of conflict, and how do we change behavior and life and thought? All of you. Whoever wants to.
I wonder, so this is, everything that we are saying is super great and cool, but how do we do it? So it's clear that we are battling against structures. So art, ideas, science, all of it is universal and fundamental by nature. And you don't need to be an artist to be part of this community, this system that triggers questions and ideas and faces these challenges. But the structures, what do we do with the structures when we think about the agency of artists? I think this is really what is stopping us.
So, obviously, the agency of the artist is important, and obviously there's a lot at stake at the moment. But I think that we also need to think about the agency of the art itself. The agency of the artist produces something that in itself also has some agency. And it might just be that we need to give a lot of space to the agency of the artworks. Sometimes I think we forget that and place too much emphasis on the agency of the artist or the curator or whoever for that matter. So let the art do the work. Especially in a time where words have failed us. Especially in a time where we must realize that a lot of the things we say and claim to possess some radicality are not that radical. So maybe it's also time for us to step back and let the works do the work. In terms of, 100 years down the line, I think we need to build upon, what was done then. But I think what is even more important is the notion of solidarity, creating solidarities on different levels, moving away from the very, attractive but dangerous polarizations that are happening. It's very fancy to choose sides, but we need to look between the ends of the spectrum, right? It's not just the light on this one end or the light on the other end, but all the shades that matter, And I think we can learn to do that, so that's what I would have to say towards that.
Thanks for that question, Sabi. I mean, it's on, everybody's talking about it. We're talking about agency of artists, agency of art institutions, small organizations, and I think the best we can do is just keep going to try and lend support and build those micro-solidarities across. But, I mean, something we struggle with on an everyday basis, even at KHOJ, you know, how do we continue to support the work that we believe allows artists to say things when they want to say it? And I think we have to continue to do that, maybe a little more quietly, but we have to do it. And it's a tough call, and it's something we're struggling with. And we will continue. I don't think there are any easy answers, really. And you will know for a fact that I think this is probably one of the first few times that we're feeling it. You know, we worked with artists from the region, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, etc., where they went through this much before us. And yeah, so we've learned from them, and let's see where we go.
Thank you, everybody. I just want to say that let us recognize that we're living in a time in this country, but not only in this country, where the regimes that rule us also actively solicit the agency of artists. It is not just a question of refusal, it is also a question of active complicity. So the question of agency of the artist is not only a question of the artist as a witness or a resistant to change, it is also a question of complicity to power and its incredible violence, which, for instance, in this country is often taking the form of works of architecture and art. A new building that is built is a work of architecture. There are buildings being built in this country. There is sculpture that is being made in this country. They are works of art, and they are works of complicity with an authoritarian tyranny. So let's recognize that. If there are no earth-shaking questions that will not transform our world, we are done right now, okay? Thank you so much, all of you, for everything.